Before I get started here, I just want to, let me switch slides. I just want to mention that I am with MSU Extension, and all of the programs that we do are open to everyone without regard to any of their potential affiliations. So please know that we welcome you and we support you, and I'm here if you ever need me. So as Josh mentioned, before I get started in my topic area, I just want to note that I think, Josh, you did a really nice job of setting the stage for some of the needs that tree fruits also have. So, I know we were talking about this more in sort of, non-fruit tree terms, but there are a lot of common and overlapping themes. So I hope you're able to translate some of that over to tree fruits as well. One thing you had mentioned, Josh, that I made a note of was with regard to planting depth. So I do not have that in my talk, but I want you guys to know that some tree fruits have what we call rootstocks. And rootstocks are on the bottom portion of the tree, and they're grafted onto a scion wood, which is a variety of the tree on the top. And so for apple plantings in particular, you want that graft to be above the soil a couple of inches. But with some stone fruits, it's okay if it's at the soil line or even just below. So just a note, it's something I didn't have in my talk, and I wanted to be sure to address that for you. So the other thing I think Danny, thank you, Danny, has done for you already, because my talk is very specific on tree fruit variety selection and a couple of sort of very general pruning tips. Danny has provided for you all a couple of resources that I want to put a plug in for, which are the stone fruit pest and disease guide. So these are, this one as well as the apple pest and disease guide are both geared toward beginners. So if you have no clue about any of the pests and diseases that attack tree fruits, these are awesome guides to get started and learn a little more about. And then my fabulous colleague, Bill Shane, put together a nice document that he published online for more information about varieties that are really suitable for Michigan, and there's even some information on rootstocks in there. So please take advantage of those. They're free to you all, so all you need to do is click on the links and use those. I am going to turn off my video. So hi, this is me, and I need to ensure that I have good stable internet connection. So I'm going to stop my video and get rolling on the talk. All right. So as some of you may or may not know, I saw a few familiar names, but I'm Emily Pochubay. I am the Tree Fruit Integrated Pest Management Educator. I'm based out of Traverse City, Michigan, serving the northwest lower portion of the state. And my primary role and responsibility is to serve commercial tree fruit growers in the area. So working with folks that are enthusiasts and in a more backyard setting is not really my primary role, but I'm always happy to help you. So please don't hesitate to reach out, and we can work together to solve problems or find good solutions. So the first question that I like to ask folks when they talk about raising fruit is, why do you want to do this at home? And I always get tons of really great responses and answers, which include that you can control the spray program. You can plant unusual varieties. So sometimes folks remember these heirloom varieties or varieties that maybe their grandparents had that you can no longer find in stores. And they just want to bring those back and be able to share them with their families. You can also pick fruit when it's at its best. So one of my favorite things to do is walk out to the backyard, pick a peach off the tree when it's at its ripest and best, and eat it right in the backyard. So hopefully someday you guys can do that too. And then of course, it can be a challenge, but when you do it well, you get so much enjoyment out of it. So there are a lot of benefits to raising fruit at home. But I'd be remiss to not mention that it is a very complex system. Just like you and I love fruits, there are tons of pests and diseases that love to eat fruits too. So Growing fruit really is a commitment. It's a tremendous time and equipment investment. And once they're in the ground, they're perennial crops. So you can't really change your mind. You know, it's not like you can plant another vegetable seedling next year. You're kind of stuck with it, or, you know, you can get rid of it and try something new, but a big commitment. So our outline is pretty brief here, but what I want to do is talk about different tree fruit types, the varieties that I think would be good for home use, and give you guys some pruning tips. Jumping right in with apples, firstly, I want to say that I think apples are a really excellent choice for anyone who's thinking about growing fruit trees in their backyard for the first time. They're pretty forgiving. Yes, they do have requirements. They still have a lot of challenges, but overall, in terms of, you know, planting a tree in the ground, they're pretty forgiving in that you can plant them on colder marginal sites and even on heavier soils. So apple trees, while they're not going to survive in standing water or, you know, really heavy clay soils, but they're more tolerant than some of our stone fruits that require sandier soils that are going to be more well draining. The other thing that I love about apples is that there's so many varieties available to you all that already have disease resistant properties in them. So there's a tremendous breeding programs all over the US that produce varieties that are apple scab and or fire blight resistant. And those are the two main pathogens that attack apples that I'll talk about in the next slide. Some things to remember with apples, while there are some varieties that are considered self-fruitful, meaning that the pollen from the same variety can pollinate and successfully produce a fruit of that variety. For the most part, most apples need a cross-pollinator, so you'll need to plant two different varieties, and even those that are considered self-fruitful benefit from having that additional variety to pollinize those fruits. So they'll have better fruit set year in, year out. Those fruit will be much prettier. The other thing to keep in mind is that apples do require pruning, and they require it annually. And what we need to do there is just ensure that the trees are going to stay healthy and bear fruit every year. So here are a few images that are showing apple scab. So apple scab is a fungal pathogen that can attack both the leaves as well as the fruit on apple trees. And you can see in this picture on the left-hand side that there is an apple from a resistant variety compared with an apple from a susceptible variety. So this is the how the apple scab pathogen manifests on a susceptible variety when it's unmanaged. And you can see that similar picture here. So for most of you that are out there over Zoom, you're probably thinking, ew, I don't want to eat that apple. So this is why we do recommend that you try to find varieties that are going to give you that resistant property inherently and set you up for success. So fire blight is the other big pathogen that impacts apples, and it is a bacterial disease. So this bacteria will invade the flowers of the apple trees during bloom and cause blossom blast. So as you can imagine what that means, the flower itself is killed, which then results in the lack of fruit on that tree. So not only can this pathogen impact the flowers and, you know, result in no fruit, it can actually invade the woody tissues of the tree and move throughout the branches and throughout the main trunk of the tree, even down to the roots, and kill the entire tree. And that can happen really quickly, particularly in years where where environmental conditions are favoring it. So this is important that you need to look for apple scab and fire blight resistant varieties, or be prepared to manage them pretty intensively. So Liberty is one of those varieties where it has good disease resistant properties. So it's resistant to apple scab, fire blight, as well as this disease cedar apple rust, which I didn't talk about. But just for note, folks in the more northern part of at least the lower, I don't know about the northern part of this, the UP, but in our area, the alternate host for cedar apple rust is not as common. So that alternative host is the eastern red cedar. but it is a more common plant down in the southern part of the state, in particular in landscapes. So for those of you that are from downstate, you may want to be looking out for cedar apple rust resistance as well in those varieties. So Liberty has good vigor. It also resists biennial bearing. Biennial means cropping every other year. So inherently, this variety is resisting that trait. It has a nice red skin and juicy flesh, and then it's a really versatile apple. It's good for eating fresh. You can cook it or make cider out of it. Really a great choice for enthusiasts. Whoopsie. Freedom is another great one, again, because of these disease-resistant properties, also having good vigor and resisting biennial bearing. They set medium to large fruit. They're nice and crispy, juicy fruits with a good sweet tart balance. Another multi-use apple, and the benefit of this one is that it will actually pollinate well with Liberty. So those are two varieties that you could plant together in your home orchard and be set up for pretty good success. Now, for those of you who are like me and love a Northern Spy, if you just love that classic pie apple, it holds that firm shape in your pies, then you may be interested in Nova Spy. So Nova Spy is a relative of the Northern Spy. It ripens a few weeks earlier, but it is bred to have some resistance to apple scab and fire blight. So again, those inherent properties in there will prevent you from fretting about getting your fungicide sprays on in time to prevent those diseases from showing up. And they also have good storability. Enterprise, again, a great variety in terms of its disease resistance, but one thing I want to note about this variety is that it has a very thick skin. So it's a large, red, beautiful apple, but for some folks, having that thick skin is a turnoff because it doesn't, it doesn't snap as well when you're eating it fresh. But, if you're not worried about fresh eating, you could still use it for cooking or making cider, and again, has good storage properties. Gold Rush, for those of you that are interested in a lighter skinned apple variety, this is a pretty good one. It is apple scab resistant, but it is susceptible to cedar apple rust and somewhat resistant to fire blight. So we're losing some of those qualities in terms of disease resistance with this one. But the flip side of it is that it's a pretty late ripening apple. So if you're looking to stagger harvest, then that could be a good option for you to extend your harvest season. This one should also note that it does have a tendency to russet. So for those of you that don't like blemished fruits or that kind of dull russeting on the skin, maybe you don't like the way it feels in your mouth when you're eating it, then you may want to stay away from this one. Okay, moving into pears. Pears are a tricky one. I love pears, but they generally the varieties that we're familiar with are the European varieties that are highly susceptible to fire blight. So we try to advise folks to not grow Bartlett, Bosc, or Anjou pears, and instead try to pick varieties that are gonna, again, be resistant to fire blight. So thinking about Moonglow, which is this beauty right here. We grow these at the research station. They're very tasty. Seckle is kind of a cute pear. It's a little smaller, but has a nice kind of two-tone color to it. And then this one here is the Cold Snap. I don't have a picture of Flemish Beauty. And these, there's more information in that third link that Danny put into the chat. So please read more about these. And keep in mind that pears generally are not self-fruitful. So you do need to plant multiple varieties, at least two, to get good fruit set. Okay, moving into our stone fruits here. Tart cherries are near and dear to me. Where I'm located, we have a lot of commercial growers that grow tart cherries. They grow Montmorency primarily, and we love them so much. They are the best fruit for a pie, in my opinion, but it turns out that they're kind of a pain in the butt to grow. So they are highly susceptible to this disease here that you see in a close-up called cherry leaf spot. It's a fungal pathogen that causes these little lesions on the leaf, and then ultimately that leaf will turn yellow and defoliate. And this can happen too early in the season, which results in that tree not being able to store enough carbohydrates to give it good winter hardiness. So over time, the general health of that tree will decline and ultimately it can kill the tree. Tart cherries can also be very attractive to various insects, which I'll breeze over quickly, but the benefit is that they are generally less susceptible to brown rot compared to some of our other stone fruits. So if you're interested in growing tart cherries, I encourage you to check out North Star. So again, it will be a very wonderful cherry for your desserts, and if you're making juice, it will still have that nice tart flavor. But there is better resistance to cherry leaf spot with this variety. They're still cold hardy, they're gonna produce well, they bear a little bit earlier. So what that means is earlier, not only in the season, but in their life. So they may produce fruit sooner than some of the other tart cherry varieties. As for sweet cherries, I didn't mention this, but tart cherries are generally self-fertile. So that is another benefit with growing tart cherries. However, sweet cherries, many of those are not self-fertile, but we do have some that are. So if you pay attention to those varieties as you're looking at sweet cherries, you may be able to save yourself from having to plant multiple varieties by choosing a self-fertile one. Sweet cherries are inherently more resistant to cherry leaf spot disease, which is a benefit, but then they get this other one, this brown rot, which is a total bummer. It shows up late in the season when the fruit are ripe and have a lot of sugar in them. So they are highly susceptible to that, and generally some fungicide is needed to be able to prevent that from growing. They're also susceptible to bacterial canker, and currently we don't have a very good management option for that disease. My personal favorite in the sweet cherry world is the Benton. It is self-fertile. It's a pretty nice tree. It's vigorous. It has good productivity. The fruits themselves are large, they're firm, they have a nice mahogany color to them with a red flesh. I think they eat great. They pit pretty easily. You do have to cut them in half, I think, to pit them and ensure that the pit is out of them. And I will say that this is one of the favorites at the research station amongst our staff. But some other self-fertile varieties to consider are Stella and Sweetheart. So I mentioned that insects can be a real problem in cherries, and our top priority right now for the cherry and berry industries in Michigan is the invasive insect spotted wing Drosophila. So this pest lays eggs directly into the fruits of cherries and berries, and the larvae will hatch out of those eggs and they'll feed internally inside of the fruit. So you can imagine what that would do to the fruit. They essentially rot right on the tree if they become infected before you can harvest them. So thinking about this, there aren't a lot of good management approaches for home orchardists without having to spray pretty intense insecticides. So the best option that you have is to ensure that you're pruning to keep the microclimate within the tree not as humid, because these organisms really love humidity, but then also make sure that you're harvesting those cherries early, and this goes for berries too. So if you have raspberries or something else, harvest early and often, and then use the fruit as soon as possible, or put them in the refrigerator, and then that way, if they do have an egg in them, it'll at least slow the development of the larvae until you can eat it. And don't be afraid, it's safe to eat those. It's just, you don't want to eat the fruit when they're too far gone because they just don't taste that good. So moving into peaches and plums, these are, in terms of tree fruits, definitely on the more difficult end of the spectrum. If you've seen my colleague Dave Jones, former colleague Dave Jones, give this talk, he probably told you, do not plant peaches or plums. And it's because they have so many pest and disease organisms that really love them, and they can be incredibly difficult to grow successfully. So if you're new to tree fruits, I do advise that you try something else first. But if you really just have to have a peach in your backyard, then please take a look at that document that my colleague, again, Bill Shane, put out. He has some good suggestions for peach varieties. The other thing I'll note is that peaches in particular are very sensitive to cold temperatures. So if you are in a cold location, or your property is in a hole or somewhere where, you know, it just gets too cold, then you really probably should consider an apple or something else, because peaches are just so sensitive to cold temperature. European plums can tolerate cooler temperatures, so that's another option. And then there are some plums that are partially self-fertile, like the Stanley plum. But again, more information in that document, so please check it out. So moving into pruning, quick shout out to my colleague, Karen Powers, who is over here on the right. She is the person that does most of the pruning at the research station where I'm housed. So she is, I'll call her my mentor, but she has taught me along the way good practices for pruning. So pruning objectives change depending on the age of the tree that we're taking into consideration. So for younger trees, we're primarily focused on shaping the tree, setting the foundation of that tree to grow and be successful. We're also reducing the crop to help promote growth and to prevent limb breakage. So we don't generally want young trees to set a crop, because all of the resources, if fruits are present, will go into growing the fruit and maturing the fruit. And really what we need to be doing is ensuring that there's a good structure on those young trees that can support good crops later on in their life. So as those trees get older, we're concerned with some other things. Of course, we want to be removing dead and diseased, broken limbs, and other undesirable growth. So I have some examples of what that is here. Water sprouts are the branches that you've probably seen them. They generally grow straight upright. A lot of times they are in the tops of trees. And for the most part, water sprouts give you no value whatsoever. They're generally vegetative. They'll never produce fruit, or at least not very well. So it's best to just remove those. Suckers, you're probably familiar with that term, but those usually come from the ground. Sometimes they'll come from the rootstock of a fruit tree. And again, those will give us no good value. It's best to just prune them out. Overlapping branches, you may have to choose, you know, one of the branches or the other, but you don't want both of them there, because shading will cause the limbs to get weak. And then low branches generally get in the way of other orchard tasks like mowing and things, but then also can be a problem when you think about a low branch. You really don't want anything that's, for me, I'm 5'3", and I try not to have anything lower than my upper thigh height, because as soon as a crop is set on that branch, it will be on the ground if it's any lower. So you don't want your fruit sitting on the ground. We're also looking to increase penetration of sunlight and spray applications, as well as increase air movement. So increasing air movement here is really important. So when we prune, we can increase the air movement, airflow into the trees, help those fruits and leaves dry out sooner, which is our first step in a good disease management program. And then of course, this is pretty self-explanatory, but as you open up the canopy, there's better spray coverage of the materials that you're putting onto those trees. And we're still shaping the tree here, but our primary focus really is controlling tree height and controlling shading within the canopy. And then of course, this is another opportunity that we can work on thinning the crop to ensure we have nice sized fruits. So when you get new trees, or even as you're looking at your older trees and selecting branches, what we're looking for, branches that we like, are the ones that have a wider angle to them. And that's because structurally they're more sound. They're not going to be as weak. They don't have these, what we call bark inclusions. So you can see there's more bark tissue here, and it can make that limb in a narrow angle weaker. Which makes them more prone or susceptible to breaking. So we're typically looking for these wide angle branches when we're choosing branches to keep for pruning. But we can also train those branches when the trees are young. So you can see these nice tender shoots. We've put clothespins right along the main trunk of the tree, and then rested those shoots on the other side of the clothespin to help flatten them out. So you can do that, but just keep in mind that as the tree grows and those limbs become stronger and harden off, you do want to remove the clothespin so you're not girdling the tree. Some general concepts for pruning are heading cuts and thinning cuts. So heading cuts are when you just take off the tip of the shoot or branch, but a thinning cut is when you actually remove the entire branch to the collar. So I don't have a good picture of what a collar looks like, but it's sort of the raised portion at the base of a branch. You may want to Google that before you venture into pruning, but you really want to cut at that collar and not gouge into the main limbs of the tree. So that will help promote better healing as you make those cuts. Important point to note here is that when you make a heading cut, there is a plant hormone called auxin that will facilitate the growth of new branches right at the point of the cut. So heading cuts are still good and effective, but keep in mind that they are used to promote branching. So sometimes we make mistakes where we go in and we think we're shaping the tree, but we cut off the tips of the tree, and then we come back in the summer and we see that there are a bunch of, I like to call it the umbrella effect, but there will be a whirl of branches right at the point where you made the cut, and you're actually causing yourself a problem by doing that. Oopsie, sorry. So sometimes when we get a new tree, the tree branches that are available on it will be unbalanced. So some may be much bigger than others, or maybe they don't have very many good branches, or they're not in the right place. So if that happens, it's okay. What we do is a process called whipping. And essentially what that is that we remove all of the branches, again, after planting. So once the tree is in the ground, we'll go through and cut those branches off. And what that does, gives the tree the opportunity to produce limbs that are going to be more even and more balanced. So you can see here in this close-up picture that this tree has been whipped and there are new buds that are coming out. And as that tree grows over the course of the season, these will all have an equal shot or opportunity of growing. And you'll have nice, balanced, even branches. And then that following winter, you'll be able to choose the ones that you want to keep and select. If you don't do that, you can run into problems with having bowl branches, which are just branches that will end up competing with your main trunk of the tree or outcompeting the other branches surrounding it. So the open center or vase pruning method is primarily suited for peaches and plums. Hopefully this looks familiar to you. It's kind of a neat pruning style, but essentially the concept you see here in the left-hand side is that at the time of planting, what you'll do is select 3 branches in a whirl, and you'll keep those branches, prune off all the other things. You'll take out the central leader of the tree to, again, give it that open vase shape. And then you can make, so thinning cuts would be used to remove all the extra branches that you don't want, again, right to the collar. And then you make heading cuts on the remaining branches. And again, heading cuts are going to facilitate the growth of that extra branching on those shoots. So this would be shortly after planting, and then that next year, or maybe even the year after, you start to see the tree itself will grow those 3 branches, the main scaffold limbs that you've selected, and then you can see that those branches are starting to come out. So as the tree grows and you come in to prune, you want to be sure to take out anything that's growing toward the center, because anything that grows inward is going to be shading out the intention of your pruning method or your pruning style. The other thing to note is that sometimes branches will be growing right along they'll be growing toward the ground, and generally things that are going straight down are also not of value. Firstly, they're growing in the wrong direction, but secondly, any fruits that are produced on that limb, or if it even gets to that point, will just be shaded out by all of the other limbs and foliage that are present. Okay, so when When to prune. The best time to prune is in the dormant season in February, March, or April. Older trees can tolerate pruning, particularly apples in the cooler months, but then your younger trees, especially peaches that are more, peaches, plums, and apricots that are more cold sensitive, should be pruned a little bit later in the dormant season in March and April. So there's also the pyramid shape or central leader style for pruning trees, and this is typically used for semi-dwarf apple trees. So the general concept here is once you get that tree in the ground, you will select some branches that you want to be your first whorl on that pruning style. So you'll select 3 to 4 branches, and then you will head those back. So hopefully you can see that this is a before and after picture of what you're aiming to do. And here's the central leader of the tree. It's been headed back here. And then each one of these branches that were selected were also headed, and everything else was thinned out, again, with the thinning cut to the collar. So the idea is that these branches will grow in that season, but then also you're going to be facilitating the growth of that next whorl of branches for the tree. So you can see this grower is doing just that. So he selected the first level of those scaffold limbs that'll be produced, and then he's going to cut up top here to facilitate the growth of that next level of branching. And so this says 3 feet, but anywhere from 2 to 3, 2.5 is a good distance between the different levels. And here are some examples. So again, that first level, here's your second one, you can see a couple feet above, and then you'll just keep doing that all the way until you get to the height of your tree, which probably generally around 10 feet or so. So in summary, just make sure that you're choosing a type of tree fruit and a variety that's going to be best suited for you and your site. So importantly, select varieties that you're going to like to eat. You don't want to put a tree in the ground that you don't really like to eat. And then try to pick something that's going to have good disease resistance. I think that will only benefit you and save you a lot of grief in terms of battling diseases. Oops. Oops. Don't forget to check if those tree fruits are self-fruitful or not. So you may need to refer to a pollen or bloom chart, and those are typically provided by the nursery to ensure that they're compatible with each other to produce fruits. And then, of course, as we were just talking about, be sure to prune those trees so that they stay nice and healthy and productive. And ultimately, I hope that you all have fun and enjoy your bounty. So with that, I guess I went a little long too, and I apologize, but I appreciate your attention, and thanks for inviting me to be here.
Thanks so much, Emily. I appreciate the presentations from you and Josh, and like you said, folks, for sticking with us with a little extra time today. I will maybe just pluck out a couple of questions that I think would be helpful for everyone while we have you still, Emily. There are some questions about if you already have trees that are fruit trees on your property that have blight or other disease, and they've been removed, what's the best way to approach planting new trees, and how long should folks wait before putting new trees in?
Okay, good question. So if I understand it correctly, maybe there were some older trees that were inherited on the property and they're removed, and now we're looking to establish a new orchard.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the first thing I would probably do is get a soil test done just to see. It's easier to correct soils when there aren't trees present. So get that soil test done and make sure that you don't have any, amendments or things that need to happen, or if you do, start working on those amendments before you plant that new orchard. And the other tidbit, so we don't have the data yet, unfortunately, but we do have an orchard replant project going on right now at MSU. So try and stay tuned if you can. Keep in touch with the MSU educators on that, because there are some challenges with replant issues. The other thing you can do is when you're ordering trees, whether it be through Josh or through the nursery, you can let them know that there have been trees on the site, and oftentimes they will have some good insight on what kind of rootstocks and things may be more or less suited.
Great, thanks. And then if folks are trying to clean up maybe some old trees that might be diseased or just pruning in between different trees in general, any tips on disinfecting equipment used for pruning?
Yeah, that's a good point. So if you're pruning out fire blight in particular, that's one where the disease organism can be transferred on the pruning equipment. You can use a 10% bleach solution. So, you know, one part bleach to 9 parts water, and you can dip your shears. There's some evidence that that could help, but the thing that is probably more important to do is to not prune when we have chance of rain immediately following the day that you're pruning. So open wounds on trees are a site where pathogens can enter and invade the tree. So try to prune, you know, before there is rain in the next, let's say 48, 72 hours to give that tree enough time to kind of heal over. And then anything that you remove that is diseased, you can either burn it or simply take it out of the orchard and get rid of it. But generally, I like to burn it. Don't put it on your neighbor's property, especially if they're growing fruit. They'll be really mad.
All right, thanks, Emily. I think we'll maybe call it good there. If we didn't get to your question, we've got that saved in the chat so we can follow up with you via email. And I just want to remind everyone that we did record this, so we'll let you know when we have it posted, and try to follow up with folks so that we can just share those links again with you via email if you didn't get to grab them today. So thanks again for sticking with us. A little technical difficulties in the beginning and extra time, but we appreciate you joining us today, and hopefully we will see you this spring. So thanks again, everyone, and have a nice evening.